Upon choosing to listen or watch this episode, I imagine your first question is who is the we being referenced? Is it the smaller community of the gun culture, or is it Americans, the West? Is it Christians, or is it mankind as a whole? Is this idea, is the way that we don't treat the world seriously something endemic to mankind, or is it simply the zeitgeist, the status quo that we live in our times? And the answer to that question will, in some ways, be yes, but this is an example of the pathway getting there. I think is more important because it illustrates the layers of approach that have been put into this. Now, when I say we are not a serious peoples, I do refer to different people at different times, but the strange part about it is that, or the specific element that I want to address, is that in these cases, whether it's Lucas Bodkin and Tim Kennedy, or whether it's intelligence agencies or gun control, or even conspiracy theories, or something like, the Jews, is really not something that we take seriously. Like we talk about it like it has grave meaning, but we don't act about it as if it does such. And so follow along, if you will, on how these issues manifest in a way that actually degrades from our integrity, but also challenges our intellectual honesty as well. About 10 years ago, Lucas Bodkin struck gold in the gun culture. He identified that just because a person is in the military doesn't mean that they know how to shoot. However, this created a bit of a fallacy. It created a fallacy which festered underneath the surface of the gun culture, occasionally bubbling up in examples like straddling the line between teaching tactics or technical proficiency, and how you would have this attack that would go out, say, aimed at a certain person or institution or idea, and then there would be a retreat, oftentimes by Lucas himself, into some sort of safe harbor. And the fallacy that it built was that the assumption, it's sort of a modus ponens, modus tollens problem, which goes like, yes, we're aware that not everybody in the military knows how to shoot, and this is a pendulum swing or a kind of a reaction or a coming to understanding that the hero worship of the identity of the veteran doesn't stick as well. In fact, it doesn't carry the same weight that it might have done so before. At the same time, it also created somewhat of an underlying assumption, was that if somebody was proud of their military background, they were probably bad at what they did. It was this strange, this strange connection of how, if I were to say, if we understand that just because someone's in the military doesn't mean that they know how to shoot well, it would also mean that just that they didn't know how to do other things well as well. It was sort of this like Call of Duty-izing the military, especially that of like special operations and the infantry. It's not really a convoluted, it's not really a long conversation, or it's not really a complex idea to recognize that those who are in those kinds of positions, whether PJs or Rangers or Green Berets or Delta Force or SEALs or pilots, attack helicopter pilots, like these roles that people play require quite a bit from them, but it's not, and shooting ends up only being one aspect about it. So if Lucas Bodkin is going to attack, or he's going to understand that there's a difference between, say, being really good at shooting and serving in the military, what it also doesn't acknowledge, unfortunately, is that those people are actually not so much good at shooting, but if you look at the American military as a whole, they're good at killing. And that's something that I would assume that Lucas Botkin is not good at, by evidence of his capabilities. But what this also did, so this observation, this golden observation of Lucas Botkin, that just because someone's in the military doesn't mean that they know how to shoot. It harnessed a deep-seated resentment within the gun culture, and in its worst light, shows instead of building bridges between different subsections of the community, it exploited fault lines for personal profit. In fact, though in recent months, Lucas Botkin has been kicked out of his own company, and one of the reasons that I suspect more than whatever public show was given is that he has become one of the greatest liabilities for his own company. See, there's no bridge that he has been able to cross or even stand on that he hasn't really burned so far. The special operations community wants nothing to do with him, with very few exceptions. Even the competition world really doesn't care about him. The sort of civilian industrial complex has moved on to brighter and bolder characters, and also there's this like underlying problem, which is that if with the underdog story in the United States, like which we just adore, has treated Lucas Botkin as if he's the victim of the problem, when if we were to say take a step back, it would be reasonable to expect that this was going to happen at some point in time. He has very few friends in the industry, and he has very few friends in the community at that point. Just a lot of support from different corners, but not, well, a lot. It's like an indiscriminate measurement. And why is this something that, like, what does this have to do with taking the gun culture seriously? Well, on the other end of the spectrum, you have someone like Tim Kennedy, who took an axe to the credibility of veterans by building his entire persona and personality and public image, not to mention his business, on lying about his accomplishments, his achievements, his bravery, or his willingness, his integrity, his willingness to stand up to bad leadership, and dress down literally everybody who's ever recognized that he was probably a lying sack of shit, to be gentle in the phrase. But on the other hand, you have Tim Kennedy, like you have Lucas Botkin over here, which is sort of illustrating like the gun culture's obsession with the underdog and with just like, oh well, I can be like that too mentality, and that if I I can be the civilian industrial complex or whatever, which is very different in scope and scale from something like the actual military or the military industrial complex, whether or not we're making a moral evaluation of that. It's not that it's not worth pursuing. It's just let's carry on. So now both Tim Kennedy and Lucas Botkin are, in a strange way, or not a strange way, but that what they're doing is they're pivoting away from the communities that sort of built them. Tim Kennedy is unsurprisingly running towards the political class and the politicians, where what is true or right and good is secondary. What is true is secondary to what is effective, or in the worst possible way, it's a popularity contest for the most depraved in many cases. So it's unsurprising that Tim Kennedy would pivot from, a grifting over the gun culture and the firearms industry and the desire of men to be providers, or even of moral character and capable of defending their family. But it also is unsurprising that Lucas Botkin is now pivoting to sort of an entrepreneur guru type person, where he's talking about creating a young person creating a very successful business that he was kicked out of for becoming a massive liability to that company. And again, these pivots away from their origin point maybe are a wise move on behalf of the individuals regarding, say, business strategy, but it also means that they're leaving behind not even the accountability, but they're leaving behind the people who built them up for other pastures, and they're they're basically finding somebody else to grift off of, is maybe a way of saying it. Lucas Bodkin and Tim Kennedy are two sides of the same coin. They're pivoting away from their gun culture and their veteran communities to present themselves as an entrepreneur guru or a political hopeful. They're like, now that these bridges have been burned, I'm going to have to find somebody else to call my community, so to speak. And the reality of it is like, well, this kind of behavior for us as a gun culture is not, unfortunately, that strange. I mean, what we're not taking seriously is that the firearms community is actually rather small. It's like, we like to talk about it, whether it's like boomer chest beating NRA nonsense of like, there's 50 million gun owners in the United States, or whether it's the berating of pro-gun control individuals claiming on how much financial power the NRA has, and how ironically or comical that can be, especially when faced up against behemoths like Planned Parenthood, which is a left-wing institution, and moving on. But here in like the gun culture, we have these kinds of individuals that, like, when I'm saying we don't take these things seriously, is that the attention of Lucas and the attention of Tim Kennedy I think actually they do genuinely warrant our attention, but the reaction, the commoditization of resentment has perhaps run its course in these cases. I certainly hope so. I certainly hope that it's no longer the day where it's simply rage bait for the sake of rage bait. I mean, yeah, sure, we can have fun about it, but at the end of the day, the men have sunk their ships, and it's not really our job to carry them through. I mean, it's not our responsibility to make sure that they're able to get back up on their feet. But we at the same time do want some form of redemption, and instead of getting wrapped up in which subculture that you're ascribed to, like a high school, nerds, jocks, emo kids, whatever. Instead of playing that game, we just sort of pursue what is actually right and true and good. Instead of having to grandstand on some sort of military capability or military strength, such as military prowess, as resulted in one Tim Kennedy, we would actually look at that there are concerns and threats in our area, that there are things that we live around, there are objectives that we can meet, or in the form of what Lucas Bodkin, and which would later be taken on by family. It's like, this idea of the civilian, industrial complex, so to speak, or the civilian defense industry, does need to come to terms that it's different than the military. Even though it knows it's different, it's like you're never going to be invited to like the Ranger Ball unless you're a hot chick, and let's hope it stays that way. But I mean, you're never going to be, it's never going to be the same thing. There's this tendency in the military, and I've been out for some years, where the wife of somebody who has rank will sort of assume that she will assume a posture as if she has that rank as well, as in like, well, my husband's the command sergeant major. And in reality, it's like, yeah, but you hold soft power over other people. You don't hold hard power. And even though, a person in that position does have the ability to make other people's lives hell, it's somehow kind of more despicable that they're like stealing somebody else's rank. And in the same way in the gun culture, like, we're not very serious because we still allow the resentment and hierarchy of like veterans versus non-veterans to bother us to this day, and how like it continues on. You're not going to get invited to every group in conversation. But then it also goes into like, what are the things that we're looking at? And instead of being like a tut, oh, you're not taking it seriously. You need to take this problem more seriously. Let's pivot briefly to gun control. And gun control is an interesting problem in the United States, because if we were honest about what drives a person to be supporting or an advocate for gun control, we would probably stop trying to reason with them. First and foremost, gun control is not a reasonable position to hold. And this manifests in multiple ways. This is where you can look at these different types of arguments that are made, whether by individuals, on the street or in their uppity neighborhoods, or by politicians from their fake ivory towers, is that these arguments in support of or for gun control really they're not really all that rational at all. I mean, they don't follow a logic other than give me power and I hate you, please die. There's sort of this derogatory element baked into each one of them, which should be the warning sign that what you're engaging with is not something that was well thought out in a study regarding the rights of man and the responsibilities of government and the ability to uphold a free constitution, or free people, or even liberty at all. It rather looks like some sort of petty tyranny, whether at the top or the bottom of the social hierarchy. There's no real difference between the individual in your classroom who's advocating for gun control than the politician out of California or whatever. They're both tyrants. They're just different. The only thing that differs is one probably was born with a better opportunity, and that kind of sounds funny. But let's take some examples, some key examples. 2020 happens. There's the death of George Floyd. There's rioting in the streets in Minneapolis, and in this period of time, what I think it's best described is that there was a color revolution between the center left and the far left, particularly within the government of Minnesota and many other places across the country. And so what happened was the city, the capital city, the capital area, the Twin Cities of Minnesota, which was generally known for being, quote, Minnesota nice, which could be also trained as passive aggressive, or in other words, kind of milquetoast. Whatever the political far left is at the moment, we're going to be like, kind of politically center left. They dive aggressively into the far left in the spectrum during 2020 and 2021, resulting in 2022, new elections on the state and local levels. And you have what you have now is the city of Minneapolis is now beginning to resemble Gotham in a less cartoonish and more depressing way. There's parts of the city which are not looking like they're going to recover from the 1,500 buildings burned. There's parts of the city where all of the lucrative businesses have already left and been replaced with creepy murals. The violence in the city is expanded, where robberies at gunpoint are now somewhat more common. Gang violence has escalated dramatically, so that certain areas like North are kind of no-go zones, especially for police, where citizens are advised not to stop at the stoplights in the area because they will get carjacked. And speaking of carjackings, there's like 3 to 7 or 3 to 5-ish carjackings a day. Maybe 2 to 5. Let's do 2 to 4. So Minneapolis is plunged into this sort of criminal spike. And in order to obfuscate it, you have attempts to change the data. If they're not prosecuted, it's not technically a crime. It was just arrested, maybe for protesting, or pick your, gentle poison. But the people in the city know it. They can see it. They can see what's going on. Young kids, particularly that of African-American appearance, but not exclusively them, are seen walking around the streets with, little chest sling bags or fanny packs kind of slung across their chest. And if you see that and they've got the shiesty, or they fit a certain, like the way their movement, and you can observe it, it's pretty safe to expect that there's some sort of Glock with the switch in that bag. And of course, this is replicated in criminal activity, whether it's the robbing of convenience stores or the jacking of cars, carjacking. And so now the statistic that's allowed to get through, or the statistic that happens to make it through, despite the suppression of evidence, is that, or the suppression of reporting, is that gun violence is up in Minneapolis. And that type of gun violence, in this example, is young kids between the ages of, say, 13 and 16 or 17, using modified, fully automatic Glock-like handguns to engage in gang wars, initiations, just, wanton violence or robberies and so on and so forth. And so the proposed solution by the gun control advocates is to take away AR-15s, or to make AR-15s illegal, even though it's just they're not the weapon being used. But see, this illustrates the point. This illustrates the point is that people who advocate for gun control are not actually interested in the solution that they're recommending. They're not actually interested in the solution to the problem. It's just another opportunity to stab you in the back. It's just another opportunity to take their political opponents and demoralize them through regulation, to control them through agencies and organizations, to export power and authority over somebody else with little or no risk to themselves. See, if I were to exert my own physical capabilities against another person, there'd be some risk involved. But if I can use the weapon of the state, and maybe the sole purpose is for the enjoyment of watching you suffer, well, I can do that by advocating for gun control, especially when somebody, you look at the things that gun control advocacy typically targets. The gun control rules, the things, the changes being advocated for in these gun control movements are consistently and comically specifically aimed at trends and capabilities, or trends and trends of the other political persuasion. It would be, like an awkward equivalent of it would be, what is brought up? Well, everyone owns cars. Cars kill 55,000 people, or car accidents and car collisions and car-related injury or car-related deaths is about 55,000 a year, which is dramatically more than that of, say, gun violence. But still, at the same time, it would be like me saying that we need to regulate cars, but just find whatever is the most popular car that my political opponent is likely to drive. Let's just say it's a Subaru, and say that those have to be banned. We whatever. If I drive around my neighborhood and I classify people of the political persuasion by their car, and then pick the most popular car that I decide is of the opposing political persuasion, this is what we're doing in gun control. We're not actually solving the problem. I'm just using. It's not even solving any problem. It, in fact, is creating a problem. So if we were serious about, say, the right to bear arms and our individual rights to own firearms, then we would recognize that those who advocate for gun control are not serious peoples. Neither are we, but we're not treating them seriously because we're treating them as if they were good faith actors. But the first requisite of being in support of gun control is that you're a bad faith actor. You have to hold a level of tyranny, or you must hold some sort of view that you are wiser than those out there, and than those who own firearms. You are wiser. You are smarter. You deserve some form of, maybe because you feel threatened, that you deserve to not feel threatened. That you get to take away somebody else's stuff, and you get to disarm and defeat you get to disarm your opponent just because you think you're better, and that's the core of the issue. Gun control is not about saving lives. It never was. You look at the statistics, you look at the actions that are taking place. It never does that. It creates the opposite. It creates controls. It targets political opponents. It's not really an action that is supported morally or even rationally. It's just, if we were to approach it correctly, we would look at those who in our presence advocate for gun control and recognize you're evil. You can repent, but you're not going to rationalize them. They're not going to rationalize their way out of that position. They have to recognize, oh no, this idea that I hold that I am a superior person because I get to dictate who does and doesn't have the right of self-defense means that I'm just a bad person and that it's not rational. The second, this would be the illustration of what we're looking at. The advocation for gun control is the fact that we would continuously engage in arguments after arguments after arguments with people who support gun control, who want to take away guns, who want to talk about magazine bans and assault weapons bans and blah, 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 blah. At some point in time, you have to recognize you can't fix them. It's not going to function intellectually. 2013, you had there was like a shooting up in Connecticut. How am I forgetting the name of it? Whatever. There was and what came out of that? All of these, you had all these arguments being presented by politicians and advocates and the high priest clerics of the state, the activists, which should be seen as what they are, bishops of the worship of government. But fine. If we were to recognize, all these people came out with all these arguments about 30 round magazine clip and all these weird phrases that were all very quickly debunked. All of these same people were very quickly shut down in public conversation, but when they had another opportunity to bang the idiot gavel, they did so after the Parkland shooting in 2018, and the same illiterate buffoons came out and talked about how we need to have a conversation about gun culture or gun control. And if we were to take those people seriously, the moment a person says, we need to have a conversation about, the first question we would do, the first response we would have is to look at them and make an honest assessment of whether they intellectually qualify to even participate in that conversation. Because when it comes to gun control and gun violence in America, the people who want to have a conversation know so little about the subject that their input could not be anything other than detrimental to the mental health of everybody else in the room. They need to go be educated by somebody who knows what's going on. They need to go learn about something other than whatever their stupid, self-fulfilling prophecy of propaganda tells them, and they would separate. And then they could be invited to the conversation. But how else do we just not take gun control seriously? It's the second part and the second problem with gun control as a concept is it actually is it creates sort of a circular reasoning that has no end. See, to the person who I'm sure by now no one's fitting this persuasion is listening to me because I've admittedly been insulting on the subject, but I guess you can't really insult something if it's true in that way. Weird problem. But the person who advocates for gun control, the existence of one person who advocates for gun control on the base, on their own, which on the basis in this case is, because they believe that they have some sort of right to control other people's. They might have like sort of latent slaver attitudes. But because the existence of somebody or a part of the population who believes that they have exclusive authority to dictate who does and doesn't own firearms is in sort of the justification for their possession to begin with. By someone, me sitting across the table from someone who says that they believe that the government or government agencies or that the voting populace or whatever should have the right to disarm its own population. By advocating for gun control, the possession of firearms is therefore justified. The ethical requirement is met at the first notion of somebody saying, I think we need gun control. And that's a problem, though, because that's the first half of the circle. That's the first half of this circular problem. Because by owning firearms, the person who doesn't or is, perhaps in this position, might feel inadequate. Again, we have to begin from, it's not a rational argument to believe, but they feel inadequate. They feel that they are in a weaker position. They're in a weaker position from, say, that someone who does own a firearm, not even a weaker, just a more vulnerable position. And so as a result, then they should advocate for, then they have to advocate. It's their form of response, is to advocate for gun control. And so by supporting gun control, you justify the use of, you justify individuals owning and bearing arms in the event that you try to enact that action. And in order to, and by owning firearms, the person believes then that the person may come to believe that that action should be taken. By holding the idea by holding the idea, you justify the possession of firearms. By holding the idea of gun control, you justify other people's possession of firearms, which would be validated if you were to try to enact that idea. If one person tries to enact, whether it's a single person or it's 1,000 people or it's half the population or more, if they were to try to enact gun control on the rest of the population, it would validate the existence of those firearms and the possession and training of those firearms by those who said did, which would then go back to, you know, the people who advocated for the tyranny to say, oh my gosh, you know, we're being injured. Look at how unsuccessful our tyranny is, but they would use different words, and then they would advocate, of course, for more. And this is, again, gun control is it's a self-fulfilling, self-feeding, it's a feedback loop on itself. It's never going to be solved. It's never going to be enough. It's just give me more power, take away more of theirs, damage more of my political opponents, and on and on and on and on. The more gun control you enact, the more violence you will encounter. The more violence you encounter, the more justified you will, the gun control advocate will be for suggesting more gun control, and the cycle continues, and the cycle continues, and the cycle continues. Again, leading to the point that it's not irrational, and so we should not treat gun control with merely just this idea that we can argue our way out of it. Recognize again that the person who advocates for it is evil. They're advocating for something that is wrong. And before this turns into some sort of like, oh, I'm holier than thou, or I'm mightier than, it also is worth noting that we all are. We all have evil within us. And so the difference in the case here is that we might recognize that the responsibility attached to the right to bear arms is that we are responsible then for what we do with it and what we don't do with it, which is a much easier route to take if you just say, I don't have it, so it's not my problem. If I just get rid of all my things, then I don't have to think about it. If I get rid of all my capabilities, then I don't have to think about it. And of course, once again, we're back to the problem of gun control is not rational. And therefore, we should not look at it as if it needs to be argued out of existence. We should simply make the appropriate moves through local and federal levels to take people whose job it is, whose job is to execute this form of tyranny on others, and make sure that they're just without a job. We're not going to go down the fool's, self-masturbation of like, oh, we should do bad things to people. No. If we were serious about our country, if we were serious about these issues, we would simply say no. We'd find out, we would be clear with those who are engaging in such actions that it will not be considered acceptable anymore, and they will be left without a job. I don't care if they find another one, as long as it's not an activism, because that's not a job. That's like, again, clergy. But there's other issues in our country, and there's other issues in our world that we engage in this sort of not taking things seriously. Before we get into that, this is actually in the middle of the episode, and we're talking about today's sponsor is Obsidian Arms. Now, Obsidian Arms has been the supporter of the show for quite some time now. They have carried us along, and we have worked with them, and we've thoroughly enjoyed our time. Now, what do they do? And if this is something that's new to you, Obsidian Arms is a manufacturer out of Minnesota. They create a series of punch and tool kits. If you're into firearms maintenance and even some gunsmithing, if you are a profession in the gunsmithing world, they make a premium set of tools that, if you know what we're talking about, the right tool for the right job is important, especially when you're dealing with things that could involve gouging and marring and damaging the value of the product or its appearance in the long run. If we want to be good stewards of our firearms, we can acquire the right equipment to do so, and one place is Obsidian Arms. And if you go and you use the code below, you'll get 10% off, but you can pick up a set of their toolkits, which come with a lifetime warranty. I suggest the AR-15 one, but they come with a lifetime warranty, so if a certain tool kind of gets damaged, I mean, they're punch, polish, quenched, they're made to a high standard, but if anything happens to one of them, you can send it back, and they'll replace it. So, if you want to support the show, head over to Obsidian Arms at obsidianarms.com. Don't forget to use the code in the description below for 10% off your order. There's two other cases. Well, there's really three other cases that we're going to get into to close this off. And that is, and they're going to go a little bit quicker than the earlier two. And this is because I think this has to do with like our country as a whole and a lot more going on. In a decent amount of right-wing media, some of left-wing media as well. I'm sure you can find it there, here and there, but in a decent amount of the right-wing media, there's this conversation about, there's kind of this underlying conversation that talks about like the intelligence agencies as like the boogeymen. And whenever, we can't explain something, we attribute intent to somebody that we may have never met or even does not even exist. We blame these agencies, these people, these organizations for things that that oftentimes like kind of hide in the background, this like shadowy, like, and we're going to take the idea of like the deep state for a minute here. And the problem about where I'm saying that we don't take it seriously is not that there's a potential for the thing to be true, that there is, there have been malicious activity by organizations such as the CIA or the FBI or the DIA or the DEA. However, like, the problem that it produces is that we never change. Like, we never move on. It's just sort of like, well, the CIA is bad. Now I feel happy. And I'm not, to those who I know you, I'm not throwing daggers at you. I'm trying to be specific here. It's kind of like some of you in like the Tucker Carlson level conversations of like, well, the CIA is doing the bad thing. It's like, well, okay, well, I mean, we're going to get into this tool for breaking down these issues, which is tell me who did what, where, when, and how, and then we'll determine the why. Behind every tragedy, there's something going on. But there's another example of this issue of like an example of not taking things seriously that comes down to like school shootings. If we were, there every once in a while, there's a something like a school shooting makes its way into the popular media and into the front pages, and it, of course, it erupts in the conversation of gun control. But we're not moving back to that. And then eventually, some sort of meme comes out, which shows how the FBI was aware of the suspected shooter. And so we bring this up time and time again that, well, it happens, and then the FBI knows about it, and it turns out that they were aware of it, and then we just kind of go, they're to blame. As if like as if this organization known as the FBI was responsible for your hometown or for your schools or for everything else that happens. And it's not to say that they aren't. I mean, that's part of what the role is in our society. It's part of one of the accepted roles of being in law enforcement is to stand up and protect the innocent and protect others. But it also tends to be an abdication by the individuals. If after every school shooting, I'm just satisfied in saying that, the FBI messed up again. Thank goodness it wasn't in my district. But then I changed nothing in my life. I'm not concerned about the security apparatus of the school. I'm not concerned about where my children go. I don't have kids at this time. Don't read too far into that. But the thing that we don't take seriously is that we don't take our own community seriously. Like, it's somebody else's fault that this happened. You sent your children to that school. It doesn't mean that you're responsible for the actions of the shooter, But we're when you centralize things on a scale like this in our world, in our country, even whether it's education or law enforcement like this, they're not, the ivory tower is not going to be able to pick up everything that goes on. They're not going to be able to stop every plane or every shooter or every bullet. And if they were to have such activities, it would come at the great cost to your liberty and mine own. If we were serious about these things, we would actually look for solutions that we can engage in, and not just revenge fantasies and speculation. Instead, if you know, like whether it's gun control advocates, which again we've already covered, or it's we ourselves within our cultures and our own communities, if we took these things seriously, if we really took, like, you know, the issue of like, oh, our concern with school shootings seriously, then we would make sure that we have actions and processes in place to minimize that possibility, or we would invest into our own, maybe even our own academic system, which is corrupt. You know, there's issues with corruptions there. But the challenge and the problem is that we're not very serious about the things that we claim to be serious about, because we're entirely okay with being satisfied by blaming somebody else for letting it fall through the cracks. This is getting a little bit broader. We're not really a serious people because we assert our beliefs onto other people, not like we assume that they believe the things that we do, but they don't, and then we assume that, like, say, you know, an example of like the West as a whole, which is very strange. Like, the West is not a very serious peoples, because you might talk about in-group versus out-group preference, but the ideals of the West, one of the ideals of the West is that people are more or less judged by their character, and that the idea of being exclusively loyal to your subgroup, when you become an American, if you were to be exclusively, say, exclusively loyal to, say, people of Swedish descent, you'd be looked at with negative eyes. But then we also recognize that, like, we as individuals, oftentimes, many of us in this country recognize that, yeah, we're going to have our friends, we're going to have our communities, we're going to have our churches and the people that we get along with, and we're going to have preference for them over somebody else, somebody that we don't know, when it comes to things like, maybe we're going to go to a cookout, or we're going to, you know, share community resources or something like that. But what we do then is we assume that other people hold those values, and they don't, and they take advantage of it. And there's this issue with, like, forms of what we're seeing within, like, immigration cultures and, you know, communities of immigrants, legal or otherwise. This isn't to attack them. Is that the issue with assimilation is that assimilation doesn't look like speaking English, even though that might have a piece of it. It doesn't mean just getting a good job or having some sort of a place to work on. But in order to properly assimilate into America, you actually have to forsake your loyalties to, say, ethnicity, or you have to forsake your loyalties to a country of origin. Otherwise, you shouldn't be treated like an American citizen. Maybe you have the same rights as an American citizen, but it would be appropriate for Americans to exclude you from certain activities, even if maybe some of those are financial, because you're expecting an uneven scale. You're holding somebody to in this case, the one person is holding another person to a standard that they themselves will not hold. If we were serious peoples about our country and about the West as a whole, we would recognize that not everyone who we are engaging with holds the same, not even egalitarian, but classically liberal values of intellectual honesty and intellectual humility. We would recognize that that certain subgroups of the United States right now hold a double standard when it comes to morality, as in we can do evil things to one another, but you can't do anything to us. And there is a reasonable element to this. Like, veterans have a better capability of holding other veterans accountable than, say, people outside of the gun culture. I am more capable of holding, say, my siblings accountable than you are, someone who doesn't know them, or like a family member, and that creates these circles of these concentric circles of like influence and capability. But when we talk about with, say, certain types of gang activity, or even subcultures of the United States that engage in a certain type of criminality more often than others, and then yet claim to be held, being held, differently, is like, no, the problem is that you believe that you can get away with it because you look a certain way, that you deserve to get away with committing a crime because you look a certain way, that, whether it's a vengeance pact or it's a, whatever. And all of that is a smoke and mirrors way of saying that it's a supremacy argument, that I am a better person than you. I am excluded from the consequences of my own actions. And if somebody were to engage in those behaviors, then and hold on to those tendencies, then we would no longer treat them like someone who can be rationalized with and recognize exactly what's going on. We're dealing with a criminal. We're dealing with somebody whose intent is to do wrong. They're not intent on doing right, but misguided. They're intent on doing wrong and justifying it all the way down. And this can come across in the form of even conspiracy theories. See, you have these issues that we look at. And I know conspiracy theories is a loaded term in our country. It's such a loaded term because we want to say, oh, it was created by the CIA to discredit other people. Or maybe some people just are engaging in pseudo-religious fallacies for the sake of a level of self-importance, which is entirely dependent on building an entire constructed worldview around themselves as if they were the hero of the story, that they were the ones that understood that they broke through the matrix, and all that's required of them is to continue believing that that they are Jon Snow or whatever. They are the one. See, conspiracy theories, oftentimes targeting other organizations or sent externally, can be rather easily determined on whether or not they have any validity or not. Who did what, where, and when? If we're going to talk about big energy and big oil, or whatever the problem is, and we're talking about a train derailment, who did what, where, and when? Who failed to do their job? Who set up a problem? Who created the derailment? Who refused to do their work? Who stopped paying the world? Like, who did what, when? And then we can look at the consequences. If you're going to talk about the intelligence community, the military-industrial complex, who did what? If we were serious peoples about these kinds of issues, we would not be satisfied with simply casting out blame on an ambiguously large or named organization, sometimes even a fictional one. And then being satisfied with that, as in like, oh, it's their fault, they did it. We would instead be interested in prosecuting the outcome appropriately, and we would move on to things that we do have productive capabilities in. If you're going to tell me something like, conspiracy theories in this sense are a problem in the way that they oftentimes almost always begin with ascribing a motive. You see this very common in left-wing, particularly left-wing conspiracy theories, like especially like the ones that gain the most intent, is that they hold their intuition, their so-called intuition, to such a high level that they get to assume the intent of other people. We've seen this happen multiple times, especially in like live television. I think one of the most interesting examples that still stands is a number of the conversations that Jordan Peterson was having in like 2015, kind of during his first rise to public prominence, where he would catch his interviewer ascribing motive and intent onto him, that he would catch people especially the people who were interviewing him, particularly as a dishonest interlocutor, and he would catch them subtly insinuating that he had a certain motive or a certain intent. But you can see this also happening. So like the whether it's in Black Lives Matter or it's in like the transgenderism thing, or it's like whatever. It's just you're just there's so oftentimes this intent to ascribe motive. But you see this on the right as well. It's well, the agencies or the deep state. The deep state is trying to you do think that the deep state, if the deep state existed, do you think the deep state then? I mean, and I understand that when I state that question, I understand what I'm saying when I state this. There's multiple definitions, multiple ways that people refer to something called like the deep state. But if the so-called example of the given example of the deep state existed, do you not think that the deep state itself would believe that it is justified in existence? And if it does believe that it's justified in existence, calling it the deep state or calling it and saying, you're in charge of things, wouldn't be a problem for them because they already believe that they're there. In other words, like if I rightfully believe that I am the head of my household and somebody comes to me and says, you're acting like the head of the household, I'd be like, that's correct. That is exactly correct. Or if I, or if I was, say, functioning, we'll use this, if a terrorist came to me while I was functioning as a ranger and said, you're sneaking in our house and you're attacking us in the night and we're losing badly. You're oppressing us at night. And be like, absolutely. You're building bombs to blow up women and children and you're selling opium. I'm not really having a moral conundrum about this. So the issue that we're hearing with is this idea of conspiracy theories and the deep state and blaming somebody, is that if we were serious about it, we would pay attention to the kinds of accusations that we level at people and consider first and foremost whether or not that accusation's even going to matter. If a person's a racist and they are actually a racist, like they actually believe that they're a racist, and you call them a racist, they're not going to care. They're just not going to care because you're like, yeah, right. I am what I am. And so if somebody is, and so the problem that we're running into in this one is that, not everybody holds the same morals that we do, and it's important for us to figure that out sooner than later. They might hold a loyalty to something other than you. This is what the Christians encountered in early Rome when they were being persecuted. It's that they did not hold a loyalty. They held a higher loyalty to Christ, to God, than they did to the Roman emperor, and this was unsatisfactory in Rome. In fact, it was such a consequence that you would not bow to Caesar and make sacrifices to him. Is that your loyalty was in question, and so here we are, which leads to the last, and at least on this not on this channel, but in this subject, like in media of this sort, the most caustic, the most politically dangerous, perhaps the most dangerous one, and that is this sort of conversation about the Jews, because what you get in our day and age is there's so much noise in this field, in this area of conversation. If you think of like noise to signal ratio, there's so much noise in here that the amount of signal is extremely hard to read. There's so much back and forth and anti-Semitism this and pro blah 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 this and slur here and attack there and artificial support or awkward support for just God's chosen people kind of issues. And what I mean by this is that when we talk about this issue of like, quote, the Jews or like the Satanists or the issues with like of this nature, it's never really gone into who did what, where, and when. If we were serious about it, we would actually address these issues. Who did what? Who created this banking institution? Who isolated this amount of people? Who it's not just who influenced, and I'm not talking about Mossad as a who. Tell me who did the activity. Oh, Israel blank as a whole is causing death in Gaza. Who fired the rockets? Who engaged in the activity? Which military unit? What region of what area? But we're never going to do that because it's not that important to us. It really just isn't. It's not that important to us. It's important to be able to identify that somebody I don't know, that I have no connection to, did something bad somewhere else. Cool, thanks. Like, evil people do evil things. This is the world we live in. But instead, we decide to distract ourselves from the responsibilities in front of us by blaming or identifying some sort of shadowy organization over there that has all the money and is the Rockefeller twisty, mustache, whatever the name is now. We're not serious. Like the problem with conspiracy theories is if we took them seriously, we wouldn't just sit around and talk about them like they're fun ideas. Like, we wouldn't collect conspiracies like Pokemon cards. Like, if we really were serious about it, if we were serious about things like national security, if we were serious about things like election integrity, we would not engage with dishonest people on trying to determine how our elections are going to be run. We would make sure that if we were serious about education, we wouldn't send our children off to be turned into goblins of the state by people who can't figure out what gender they are. If we were going to, like, the things that we take seriously, like, imagine the example of the father or the parents who day after day after day complain about how the blah 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 blah, the organizations, the liberals, the Marxists are invading all the schools while their kid goes to school, and then when their kid turns 18, they fork out their life savings to send that kid to college with no education, no spine, no moral foundation, only to have that kid return home over like Christmas break or whatever and say, "I hate you, Dad," because now I'm now going to be known by a different name. And they're Marxists, and they've given into their entire resentment. Like, this is the issue, is that we're not a serious peoples because we are okay. We have satisfied ourselves not with solving the problem, but being the most witty in identifying it. If we were going to solve these issues, if we were going to solve the school shooter problem, we would take ownership over our education. We'd take ownership over our schools. We'd take ownership over the environments that we lived in. But no, that's the state's fault. But the state can't do it because we know the state messes up everything. So, I'm satisfied with a non-solvable problem. Or it would be the deep state problem. And like, well, then who's there? Who is there? Who is the deep state? I'm saying that they don't exist. I assure you, there are people who hold power who do not have recognition in this country. But it doesn't mean that we're just going to say, win the day by winning the argument. No, we need to continue on. We need to continue on in process. If we were serious about gun control, we wouldn't take people who support gun control seriously in intellectual endeavors. We would say, well, I'm sorry, but you lack the equipment to engage in the conversation. You don't get to vote on it. Your votes don't matter. You don't get to participate in it because you don't believe in the thing in the first place. I don't debate plumbing with people who don't believe in pipes. I don't debate rights with people who think that slavery is okay. I'm sorry, at least the American form of slavery, let's just do slavery as a whole. That's even easier. And I don't engage in conversations about civil rights abuses with people who don't believe that civil rights exist beyond their certain tribe. There's no point in engaging in that conversation. You just have to recognize, hey, their whole worldview is looting. So until they reform, you're not required to open up your doors and support them. Rough. We wouldn't be, if we treated these things seriously, we wouldn't expect irrational people to engage in rational conclusions. And if we took our world seriously, we would recognize that we cannot abdicate our way into peace with a population or with individuals whose intent is to do us harm. You see this with foreign countries, foreign countries. You see this with issues of like certain forms of Islam. And And that's it. We see this with Islam. We see this with examples of it. We hold these values to be true, but they don't. So when you fill your population with people who don't share your values, you should not. Why should you act surprised when your environment no longer resembles the product of the values that you once held? But if we were a serious peoples, if we really did that, we would focus on what we can do. We would focus on what is right and true, not what is emotionally or politically expedient. And we would pursue the well-being of our society instead of arguing with people whose openly stated public intent is to destroy it. If we were a serious peoples, we would recognize that, yes, there are flawed people in Americans past. And many of those people have held secrets to the grave. But our goal, we don't honor the past by, but we already don't honor the past by elevating to them to some sort of legendary godhood status. We look at him like King David in the Old Testament, a man deeply flawed who did good things and that loved the Lord with all his heart. Was a man after God's own heart, as the phrase goes, and that we would recognize that he made errors, and we would not just sit here and go, well, we got to get rid of anything that's King David related because he slept with Bathsheba. Oops. But there's a difference between having some humility and introspection, and there's a difference between that and throwing your pearls before swine, expecting them to, uphold your values, uphold the values of the country, and then act all, oh no, how did this happen? When you burn every bridge that you exist on, you're not really the victim anymore. When you've lied about your military career for the entirety of your, public life, you're not really, you're kind of in a hard place. When we recognize that people who support gun control are not in any way, shape, or form rational. They believe that they have some sort of Gnostic, esoteric wisdom that makes them better than you. If we were to look at intelligence agencies and the concept of intelligence in our world, we'd recognize that war is never going to end. There is no way to end war because the world is too small. Technology is too small. An organization on the other side of the world can inspire, create, or induce another organization to engage in some form of active terrorism without directly making any connection, so you can have a proxy conflict through terror cells. We'll use equipment from a third source and so on and so forth. Like, the issues are not... If we are going to look at this idea of the intelligence agencies as just like, they're all bad. Like, no, dude, that's not how it works. That there's compartmentalization that goes on. Figure out who did what and break it down and prosecute that person, not as a whole. Corporal punishment in that group does not work. And then finally, like, if we were going to look at conspiracy theories and you want a solution to what's going on, who did what? When? Who did what? If you can't answer it, or most importantly, if you're not even interested in knowing the answer to that question, then you're engaging with a fantasy. And that fantasy might have teeth in reality, but that fantasy only exists to be your escape from reality. You're not the main character of every conspiracy that goes on. And neither am I. But still, we carry on. So if you enjoyed this episode, if you've got a comment to below, I would be interested in hearing of other examples of things that we don't take seriously, that we could otherwise do so, and what the solution might be, and be kind. But in that case, if you want to support the show, you can head over to redactedculture.locals.com, or you can head over to redactedllc.com and pick up some of our stuff. We'd love to see you there. We'd love to see you out in public. We're going to get ready for a couple more public land cleanups as we carry on. But thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Now go forth and conquer.